Hi all, a very warm welcome to all. We are pleased to introduce you to the extremely talented individual in cybersecurity, Ms. Harleen Kaur. Harleen Kaur is a CH plank for our fundamentals 1 and 2 and Microsoft Azure AZ 900 certified cybersecurity professional currently working as a senior analyst at EY. She is also a Linux Foundation Left Scholarship, Black Hat Women in Cybersecurity Scholarship, KubeCon, and Cloud Native Con Travel Scholarship recipient. She is an active recipient participant in conferences and hackathons like KubeCon, Hackboard AUX, etc., and participates in CTFs to enhance her skills and share them with the community either in the form of blogs, or videos. He has also organized events like Hack GTB and Hack GTB 2.0, various technical talks, and volunteered at GDG DevFest New Delhi. So, without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Harleen Kaur onto the stage. Welcome, Harleen. The stage is all yours. Okay.
Thanks a lot, Sachin, for providing me with this opportunity. So, should I just get started right now?
Yes. Get started.
Okay. Thanks a lot. So, good evening, everyone. Today, I'm here to share a talk on how can one become an ethical hacker from a script kiddie or a beginner. It's going to be a detailed roadmap. But before starting, I'd like to share a short story about myself. I'm an ordinary person. In fact, I never thought about being in the cybersecurity domain during school. I was pursuing biology and I wanted to get into medical field. However, I was quite passionate about learning new things and facing challenges. So during that time, my father would often bring me books on different topics. And one fine day, he got me a book on cybersecurity. So there were a lot of stories I read about that, and like I started searching a lot of things on the internet, and I realized that this field meets my passion of learning and applying things wherever possible. And therefore, I diverted my career goals, and now I'm working in the cybersecurity field. So, if you want to get into cybersecurity field, first of all, you need to ask yourself, why do you think you want to be in cybersecurity? Is it because you watched one or two of those hacker movies or TV series? Because if that's the case, I'm sorry to say it might just not be the field for you. However, if it is because you are really willing to put in hard work and are ready to understand how things work, you are willing to spend countless nights working and learning on things that are going on in the industry and keep on learning forever, then this is the field for you, and I'm willing to welcome you to the world of cybersecurity. So, before getting started with cybersecurity, there's something I'd like to show you. This is basically a graph about security postings and clicks per million on these postings. So, you can see that the blue one is postings. So, there are a lot of security postings, however, very few clicks are there on them. This is because of a large skill gap that is there. So there is a lot of demand in the field of cybersecurity, whereas very few people are being supplied. So this career path provides a lot of opportunity, a lot of growth potential if you are willing to put in your hard work in this field. However, there are some basic prerequisites before getting started with the cybersecurity roadmap. A few things that you must fulfill, a short checklist, so that you can just get onboarded with the cybersecurity roadmap. First of all, you must be willing to be jack of all technologies and a master of some. So, for example, you need to understand cloud technologies, you need to understand Kubernetes, you need to be familiar with microservice architecture, you must be familiar with networking. And apart from that, you must be really good at some things like reverse engineering or web pen testing or something that really interests you, that gets you really excited. So that way you'd be able to understand different technologies that you would be willing to work on or you would be given opportunity to work on, as well as you'd be able to do the particular test that you are supposed to do on those technologies. You must also have a passion to dig into the things and know how they work. So for that is a basic necessity in any field. If you are working in programming, you need to understand how programming works. Similarly, if you're trying to get into hacking without really knowing how things works, it's going to be really difficult. Then again, you need to know basic networking knowledge. For example, what are ports, what are different port numbers that do different things, what is OSI model, what is TCP/IP model, what are different subnets, what are different network topologies, and so on. This is basic knowledge, and it would help you in understanding how things are working in your network. Sometimes you might have to test network equipment, sometimes you might have to test an application which is interacting with network components in a certain way. So, at these points of time, you would need basic networking knowledge so that you know what you are doing and how you are going to do it. The next thing that you would be requiring is basic programming knowledge. Now, this is not competitive coding I'm talking about. Neither is this like super deep algorithms or something. This is basic programming knowledge. You should know basic Python, basic bash scripting so you can automate your stuff. You should know how to read different types of code. So that way, if you are given a source code review task, you can just like go ahead and read some source code. Or if you have to find some bugs and you are given source code, or in case you are given an web application, you should know how web and mobile apps work, because that would help you in understanding the architecture of applications. So for example, if you have a web app, you will have cookies in that. Those cookies could be predictable, those cookies could be unencrypted, those cookies could be HTTP only. Then there are a bunch of web attacks that you can do depending on the technology that web application is using. So for example, there could be image tragic vulnerability in a web application, there could be CSRF vulnerability in the web application, there could also be an RCE vulnerability. So basic understanding of web is also a must. And one of the most important things is basic understanding of Linux. As we all know, cloud is mostly Linux servers. A lot of things are hosted on Linux these days. And Linux, apart from like just testing on Linux, you might have to use Linux for testing purposes. So as a beginner, you can just get started with a lot of Linux distributions which offer you with pre-installed hacking tools like Kali Linux or Parrot OS, or you can just like start with Ubuntu to get familiar with the command line and then install tools yourself. So these are the basic prerequisites you must like know before getting started on your cybersecurity journey. So, how can you progress towards a cybersecurity career? It could be any career in cybersecurity like VAPT or forensics or, like blue team careers, whatever it is. You need to understand certain things are very important. So, the first step would be to understand the basics. Basic knowledge is very important. So, you need to be familiar with Linux. Now, Linux fundamentals, when I talk about Linux fundamentals, you need to understand the OS architecture. You must be familiar with all the commands like OS, like ls, like cd, like rm, like make directories. You must be familiar with what are the different files that can be attacked, like etc passwords, etc sudo, etc shadow. What does sudo do? What is there in the sudoers file? All these things are very important. Again, if you know Linux fundamentals, then only like you can go for using tools like SSH or using bash scripting or things like that. You must also be familiar with basic networkings. I'm saying it again and again that it is a must know in the field of cybersecurity, because networks are everywhere in the world. Everything that is digital is usually connected by a network. You and I are connected by a network that is called the internet. So, basic networking is very important. For example, you have an application that has an API that interacts with external network in a different way, which could probably be vulnerable. you would need basic networking knowledge for that. You must also be familiar with command line because, for example, if you have to go for a reverse shell, most of them are available only in the command line mode. So you would need to be familiar with command line to find how deep can you penetrate into a network. You must also be familiar with OS architecture, be it Linux, be it Windows, be it Mac, or whatever you are using. You must be familiar with OS architectures so that you could understand what kind of files can be present in what kind of folders. So, for example, the sudoers file is present in etc folder in Linux. Similarly, you need to understand like there are DLL files in Windows. There are different files that could be stored in different places. So some of them could be vulnerable or outdated files and they could be exploited. Sometimes there are cron jobs working in Linux machines that that would let you get a higher privilege than what you usually have. You would be familiar with path variables, how to change them, how to get higher accesses. So it will be really good if you are familiar with these things so that you can do privilege escalation properly, and you can also be really confident when you're using the command line or Linux or whatever operating system you are trying to test. Again, it is very important to be familiar with basic scripting, that is Python or Bash or whatever scripting language you are using. So sometimes people like to make Wireshark dissectors in Lua. It's good. You should be familiar with basic scripting so that you can automate your stuff. You can make your own tools. So I've also made a bunch of tools for my own self, which I can use during my pen tests. You can automate a lot of things. So, for example, if you're trying to check connectivity with of my machine to my friend's machine, I would trace route it. Now, if I have 10 friends, I can just make a script to trace route if what is the path from my machine to my 10 other friends machine, or I can just make a script to ping my machine with other machines of my friends. So that is why basic scripting is very important. Again, all the answers that you are looking for, that you can think of, are available on Google. So Google Foo or Google Docs is very important to be familiar with. Once you know how to Google stuff properly, you are already a really good, you know, hacker or script kiddie. And then you can just get on learning with that Google Foo. You can search for vulnerability disclosure programs that are not listed in certain platforms. You can search for cheat sheets, you can search for exploits, you can search for vulnerabilities and whatnot. Again, you must also be very familiar with OWASP Top 10. So, OWASP Top 10 is basically a list of common vulnerabilities that are present in applications throughout the internet. So, for example, if you have a web application and it has XSS, so XSS suppose is there in the list. So, you must be very confident as to what XSS is. Then you should also know how to prevent it, how to detect that vulnerability. How to detect a vulnerability in OWASP Top 10 is like a very important skill. But apart from that, you should also know how to mitigate that vulnerability, how to patch that vulnerability, what are the possible impacts of that vulnerability on your system, and how much is the risk associated with that vulnerability. Is like, can you just go ahead with RCE on that application? RCE stands for remote code execution. Are you able to access sensitive files in that application because of that vulnerability? So that is something you need to understand with OWASP Top 10. You have to understand all the aspects of every single vulnerability in that list of 10 vulnerabilities. Now, on to Linux. As I've already mentioned again and again, you must be familiar with the Linux terminal. You should know how to use basic tools and utilities like SSH, CD, LS, copy, remove, etc. You should know where different files are, like where can you find etc. cron tab file. You can find all the cron jobs that are listed and that are running on the system with the etc. cron tab file. You can find the hashed path passwords in the etc shadow file, and so many more things that you can find just because you know basic Linux. You can practice basic Linux commands on over the wire and some other war games you are familiar with. So Bandit is a war game that Over the Wire provides, and it is really good war game to get started with Linux. You must also be familiar with the Linux system architecture. So if there's a kernel level vulnerability, you know where to go. If there's an application level vulnerability, you know which application you need to go, and so on. You also need to be familiar with basic networking. Now, you should be familiar with OSI model, you should be familiar with TCP IP model. You should be able to draw a parallel between layers of OSI model and TCP IP model. That way, it would be really easy to interrelate between them and understand the concepts even more easily. You should also understand the basics of cloud, since cloud computing is in boom right now. Since the lockdown, everything is like hosted on clouds. Our classes are going on online, everything is online. So cloud is a must. Sometimes you might need to test cloud applications or applications that are interacting with databases that are hosted on cloud. So that is why it's a must to understand basics of cloud. You should also understand different network topologies and protocols. So, you should be familiar with what sort of protocol is running right now. You should also know what are the well known ports. So, for example, port 80 is HTTP port. You should know that this port is for this thing. This is going to help you when you go for a scan of a system that you are authorized to scan, and then you see that certain ports are open, but the application does not require those ports to be open. So now you know that that particular port might be a vulnerability. That particular port can be accessed by an attacker, and it can be very harmful to you. So that way you should know well known ports, so that if something is wrong with those ports, you would understand. You should also understand basics of virtualization. So, see, virtualization is basically when you're hosting a virtual machine on your own system or on a bare metal machine or anywhere. So, hypervisors are something that also let you host virtual machines. So, you should know how these things work, what are the different types of hypervisors, how you can work with them. This is going to help you again while interacting with clouds or VMs and so on. You also must be familiar with subnetting, so that you can just, instead of typing every single IP address, you can just type a subnet during scans. You can also use subnetting to, you can also use subnets in your automated scripts and so on. There are also a few other security concepts that you need to understand. So, I've mentioned it in step 2. These are the following concepts: CIA triad. So, CIA triad is basically a three concept triad which stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data. It must be ensured in any application or any software at all times. Again, you also need to understand the difference between encryption and hashing. How the two are different. What are the different encryption algorithms that are available? What are the different methods of hashing? You should also know what a zero day vulnerability are, what's the difference between a red team, a blue team, and what is the approach of purple teaming. You should be familiar with CTF competitions and bug bounties so that you can practice them and improve your skill set much more. So, on to the CIA triad. The C in the CIA triad stands for confidentiality. Confidentiality means that any data that is there in your application is confidential. So, for example, there's a company that has made a movie, it has not been released yet. So before release, that movie is confidential, right? So when that movie is confidential, if some other person is trying to access it and is able to get access to that movie, it's very bad for that organization. Therefore, confidentiality needs to be ensured so that movie can be released on the time. right? Similarly, I in the CIA triad stands for integrity. Now, integrity basically means that the data should be the same state as it was before. The data should not be altered or tampered, especially by unauthorized individuals or entities. Okay, so for example, say you have a database of employees and their salaries. Some third person comes and lessens the salary of a particular employee. That is really bad for that person. So that is the reason why integrity must be ensured always in an application or whenever it's possible. The third one is availability, which stands for A in the CIA triad. Availability means that the application must always be available for interactions with it. So, for example, we have a banking websites. Millions of transactions are happening on that website. When that application goes down, even for a second, or say for 10 minutes, a lot of business is going out, going away. A lot of people are not able to do their transactions. So that is why availability also needs to be ensured in the CIA triad. Okay, so now comes authentication and authorization. So when it comes to authentication, authentication basically confirms a user's identity. It checks whether that person is who he is claiming to be. So, whenever you log in into your account and you provide a password or a biometric in your phone, that is authentication. User can see his authentication most of the times, and he can also change it partially. So, you guys can always change your passwords most of the time. So that is authentication. It is quite different from authorization when you think about it. Authorization is checking whether the user has access to a resource that he is trying to access. So it is implemented by an organization. So for example, say a person A has access to a resource B, so whenever he'll access that resource B, he is authorized to access that resource B. That is why he is able to use that resource B. User will not be able to see and cannot change this authorization. So suppose you are working in an organization A, you have access to a resource B, but you do not have access to a resource C. So you probably will not be able to see resource C, right? So that is the fundamental difference between authentication and authorization. You can also read a lot about different methods of authentication, different ways authorization works, and different techniques that are being used in the industry right now for that, and it would be quite helpful. Another thing you must understand is the difference between hashing and encryption. The first and foremost difference is that hashing is permanent and it can never be reversed. So, for example, there are a lot of hashing algorithms like MD5, SSA 256, etc. So, what happens here is you have a message. It goes to the message digest algorithm or our hashing algorithm, and we get a hash. Okay, so it cannot be reversed. And in an ideal hashing scenario, hash collision will also not occur, which means that when you have a hash with one message, another message will not produce the same hash or collision will not occur. However, on the other hand, encryption is absolutely reversible. So you can see here there's a message. With the process of encryption or with encryption algorithm, it gets converted into an encrypted message. Now that encrypted message goes through the decryption process and gets we can get the same message again. You have also seen this, like when you open your WhatsApp and it shows that your chats are protected by end to end encryption. So encryption is being used there also. Very basic examples of encryption include Caesar cipher, Vignier cipher, etc. It would be really good if you guys can read about different hashing and encryption algorithms. and that would also be very helpful when you are working on the same. What is a zero-day vulnerability? Now, a vulnerability which is present in a software and the manufacturer is not aware of it yet, or this vulnerability has not been discovered yet, or if it has been discovered, it has not yet been patched, then it is called a zero-day vulnerability. Since until the vulnerability is mitigated or resolved, it will always be easy to attack it for, hackers or threat actors or whoever has interest in accessing that vulnerability. What is an advanced persistent threat? So basically, a stealthy attacker or many of stealthy attackers try to get into a network and remain in it for a very long time. And they try to get access to sensitive data, sensitive information. Sometimes they try to get access to, application itself, or they try to modify databases or stuff like that. This can lead to data theft, system takeover, and whatnot. Again, on to red teaming and blue teaming and purple teaming approach. So, a blue team is basically a defensive team, whereas a red team is an offensive team. A blue team can go for threat prevention. Security Operations Center is like something which is associated with the blue team. These people use tools like software incident, security incident and event management, intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems, honeypots, etc. Whereas a red team can do vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, or VAPT. Now, the difference between VA and PT is vulnerability analysis tells you what vulnerabilities are there in the system, whereas penetration testing tells you to what extent those vulnerabilities can be exploited. So VA and PT are two separate processes, and VAPT is a process in which VA takes place. First, we do VA and then we go for PT. These processes can be done manually or with using scripts or tools such as Burpsuit. You can also write your own tools and go ahead with them. Basically, a red team tries to find bugs in the application or network or whatever is being tested at that time. So, a purple team is basically an approach in which red teams and blue teams work together and provide each other with continuous feedback. So, it is not exactly a proper team, but a methodology to implement a properly secure environment because of the proper connection and proper interactions between the red team and blue team, which provide each other with feedback. You also need to be familiar with CTFs. What a CTF is basically competitions which are hosted by organizations or institutions. These are called capture the flag competitions, and they can be of two types mostly. So the first one is Jeopardy. So here you are provided with a lot of challenges that you have to jeopardize or you have to solve, and you have to provide the flag to that for that challenge itself. However, in an attack defense CTF, you are usually given a machine and like all other participants. So you have to attack the machine of other participants while trying to defend your own machine at the same time, so that you can get flags from other people while defending your own flags so that you can win the CTF. A lot of these competitions can be found on a website called ctftime.org, and a few organizations also hire on the basis of CTFs like Payatu, Schneider, etc. Uh, Again, the next topic we'd be talking about is bug bounty. So, a bug bounty is something a lot of organization introduced for helping security researchers to find bugs in their applications. So, this is very prominently found these days. So, what organizations do is they provide you with a scope and they say that you can test for bugs within this scope, and if there are any you can report it back to us. However, if you go out of the scope it would be illegal, so make sure if you are going for a bug bounty to remain within scope. scope is mentioned for all of them. If it's not mentioned, don't do it. If it's not mentioned in the scope, don't go for it. Again, these programs may or may not be paid. So, some programs offer swags, some programs offer monetary bounties, hence the name Bug Bounty, and some may give you their name in Hall of Fame. A few may also just acknowledge your vulnerability and make sure that they patch it on time. These are very helpful in VAPT practice, and a lot of websites or a lot of programs where you can find these. A lot of websites are there where you can find these programs, and a few of them include Bugcrowd, HackerOne, etc. Again, there are three types of penetration testing. First one is white box testing, where you are given access to that application you are testing. So you might be given credentials, you might be given privileged credentials, you might be given source code and whatnot. Whereas in black box testing, you are basically an external entity trying to do testing on that application, trying to access that application or whatever your task is. Gray box testing, on the other hand, is a combination of both white box and black box testing. So you are given some stuff, but not all of it. Step 3 in your ethical hacking journey would be practice. Practice makes a man perfect. So, you must practice war games, you must practice CTFs, you must practice, on bug bounties, etc. if you are having that skill set, or you must practice more and more to improve your skill set. You must be familiar with command line. You must also be familiar with using tools that are very prevalent in the industry. So some of the Linux distros, as I've already mentioned, are there for ethical hacking purposes, and they have pre-installed tools. So for example, you have Kali Linux, you have Parrot OS, you have Black Arch Linux, and so on. You can also find a lot of practice activities like CTS, war games, or vulnerable machines on TryHackMe, Hack the Box, VulnHub, DVWA, and OWASP Juice Shop. Uh, Again, remember that whenever you are solving a CTF or a challenge or a vulnerable machine and you are stuck, you should watch a walkthrough and make notes. There is no shame in reading write ups as long as you are learning something. So make sure you make notes. You write it down in a notepad, you write it down in your notebook. It doesn't matter. Make notes so that you can revise it later on. You can watch videos for YouTubers like John Hammond, IPSEC, CryptoCat, Live Overflow, and there are so many more you can watch and understand new concepts from. You should also read a lot of blog posts and news about latest exploits, latest vulnerabilities that are being discovered, latest things that are being researched, and make sure that you keep yourself updated with the trends in the industry. The last step in your cybersecurity journey would be to consistently sharpen your skill set. More and more exploits are being found every single day. Since the since the advent of COVID crisis, everything is being shifted to a digital mode, and therefore more and more things are being done digitally. Therefore, it is important to secure everything that's going on digitally, be it online classes, be it online transactions, be it online work from home. So one must make sure to be familiar with more the latest exploits. One must be familiar with the new trends in industry, like these days supply chain attacks are taking place. One must also make sure to learn new topic every single day, and also try to implement it that day itself if you can. You must revise the notes that you made while doing those CTF or challenges or practice regularly, so that they are there in your mind and you don't forget them. You must understand that theoretical knowledge is as important as practical. You must understand the concepts theoretically and then try to implement them practically, and then try to level up on using those concepts after learning them. A few certifications that can be helpful in your learning journey are CEH, which stands for Certified Ethical Hacker. So it is offered in two modes, which is theoretical and practical. You can also go for EJPT, which is eLearn Security Junior Penetration Tester position, Junior Penetration Tester certification, and this would be, penetration tester level certification. It would help you learn. These certifications will help you learn a lot about, ethical hacking and a lot of theoretical as well as practical concepts that would be helpful in your learning journey. You can go for Splunk if you are interested in blue teaming. It's a defensive certification. It can be helpful in using the Splunk tool. You can go for CompTIA Security Plus. It is also a very popular certification these days. Then there's OSCP, which stands for Security Certified Professional, which is a sort of a rite of passage among penetration testers these days. So it's a practical exam that is offered by Offensive Security. If you're interested in forensics, you can go for Certified Hacking and Forensics Investigators by CHFI, and this is a very good certification. Then you can, if you're interested in audit, you can go for ISO 27001 ISMS. Again, there are some certifications like CISA, CISSP, and so on. These certifications require a little experience and are also very helpful in learning a lot of concepts in cybersecurity that one needs to grow in their career. So, in conclusion, I'd like to state that cybersecurity is a very exciting field to work in. However, one must not just join because of excitement and, the craze about the security things, or because of watching some web series or a movie, because this field requires hard work and consistency, and you must be committed to learning every single day. I know a lot of CISOs who are still learning. There are a lot of options in security field apart from VAPT you can explore. Just make sure to understand where your passion lies, and you must understand that there is always a need of lot of learning and exploring. So if you guys have any questions, I'd like to take them now. Okay. Which are programming languages you would suggest for a beginner in ethical hacking? So, it would be really good if you could get started with, Python scripting or Bash scripting. Apart from that, it would be really good if you can, learn basic C or C++, because, like, when you guys are doing reverse engineering, it's really good to learn as a beginner. And again, if you are really trying to get into hardcore reverse engineering or something like that, I would recommend to learn assembly. But as a beginner, you should start with C or Python, or something scripting that would keep you interested and keep you motivated with going ahead. Uh, how much is Java's role in cybersecurity? Uh, the thing is, if you are working with Java applications, you need to understand that language, right? So, a lot of mobile applications are using Java, right? So, suppose you are given a Java application, you would need to, do source code reviewing for that. So, we have certain tools like MobSF for that. So, what we do is we try to understand that language first. So, for example, if I'm given a web application, I would go for, first reading that code that's given, or reading those scripts that are given, that are being used in that website. So similarly, it would be good if you're testing Java applications that you are familiar with Java, and it would also be really helpful. Okay, how can we get internship programs for real-time experience in MNC or reputed organizations? So a lot of organizations hire for CTFs. So you can go and look up these CTFs online, or sometimes I share them. I try to share more if there are. Anyway, you guys can also apply to a lot of job openings that are there. So I've seen a bunch of internship openings on LinkedIn itself. So you can try to, improve your skill set and then apply to such programs so that you can get hands-on experience. As a college student, I also did a lot of internships in cybersecurity field. I also got a chance to develop my own tools during that time. So it's really interesting if you can get an internship, and it would be really helpful too. Can you suggest any source for SOC 3 or anything more on SOC 2, and a reference for assembly language with kernel, please? SOC, you're referring to Security Operations Center, right? For If you are trying to like work with SOC, I would suggest like try to get familiar with the tools, and for assembly language, I would suggest like just go on Google or GitHub, and you would find compiled lists of courses that are there. You can just practice with them itself. I just go for YouTube videos most of the time when I have to learn something new. Is learning Python necessary for writing scripts, or we can do it with Bash only? So that depends on how good you are with Bash, and so if like you are really good with Bash, and like you can go for like you can just send requests with Bash. You can do if you are like sure that you can do anything with Bash, go for it. But like again, if you get a Python application to test, then you might need to read some code, or try to reverse engineer that. Then you might need a bit of Python. Again, it just depends on what you are trying to do at that moment. Would performing a related online course on in Udemy or others help? Yeah, sure. Like watching videos is something you must keep on doing. Just make sure they are not like random videos on internet, and just make sure that they are useful videos if possible, so that you can learn something. So any course is helpful. I'll really enjoy watching John Hammond's videos, Live Overflows videos. Then there's IPSEC, there's Hackersploit. There are so many YouTubers, or there are a lot of courses also. Like the other day I was doing a course on offensive Python. So there are a lot of things you can do with Python in offensive side also. There are a lot of utilities like Scapy, which would like let you make your own packets and send them to applications, making them do what you want them to do. Would performing Okay, thanks for understanding the field requirement better. Please guide me the way forward and the time required. The time required, see, it depends on how much time and effort you are willing to put in each day. So like I know people who study like 6 hours a day, and then there are people who like it just depends on how much you can understand, or how much familiar you are with the things right now. So like if you are a beginner with Linux itself, I would suggest that you should first get acquainted with Linux. But if you are like very familiar with all the things that I've already mentioned, I would suggest that you go ahead and practice bug bounties or CTFs, and see where you stand. Like on on Try Hack Me and HackerOne, there are like a lot of these lists which give your ranking in the world. So, like, I had a very good ranking at Try Hack Me. So, you can just go ahead and check where you stand and try to improvise, try to learn new things, practice CTFs. That's what's going to, like, help you improve your skills. And again, you can then apply for job openings, or you can go for CTFs that, hire people. Okay. After MNC in cyber forensic and information security, what are options available? Okay, I think if you're interested in forensics field, you should, like try to apply to job openings in forensic fields itself. But if you are like interested in penetration testing, you can go ahead with that also. It just depends on your skill set and the people who are hiring you for that position. So like if you are really good at something, you can just go ahead and learn that stuff. Is Python necessary for yeah, that I answered itself. Now you can just go ahead with anything you are familiar with. You can write scripts in Lua also. A lot of people like to write Wireshark dissectors in Lua scripting language, and it's really helpful. How can we connect with you? You guys can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to help you out if you are having any problems or doubts in technical field or anything. My LinkedIn is like linkedin.com/in/techathena. Okay. For a non-technical, how should one start ethical hacking? So basically, as I shared in the slides, you should get started with Linux, learn basic Python, learn basic networking, and then like go on from there. So you can get started with Bandit on over the wire and you know learn things from there. So I think the time's already up. So
uh, Harling, it was a wonderful session. Like, I'm also working in this field. I know how much I struggle to get into this field, and when I was learning, so you had all these paper with a lot of things, a lot of informations. I think it's a great thing. Okay, so anyway, thanks a lot for Harlan. It was a wonderful session, and thanks all the audience. Okay, and there's another session going on, which is by which is on Oracle Hospitality RES 3700, which is conducted by Wallet Core. So kindly please join all the audience to that. And that's our last event in this our RedTeam Cybersecurity Summit. Okay, I hope you see you all there. So once again, thanks Harleen. Thanks a lot.
thanks a lot for having me, Sachin. It was a really nice experience.